All right, let's have a few people show up.
Did you see that video of David Cameron when he was at
David
front
Cameron.
of
That's the
the
the way he left. He was just
way
like,
he
"Yep,
left?
I'm done."
Right, cup of tea. I'd love to hear what the next line was.
Yeah, he was pretty much like, "Yes."
Right, someone else's problem.
He did like a British mic drop.
It was just brilliant.
Yep, I'm out of here. All right, got a couple people showing up. Hope I can share my screen. Last time I tried to do this, I had trouble sharing my screen. If I do, I'll send you the list of links.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Oh, I got to click on me. There we go. I'm having trouble with this camera too. You see, this camera's fine. It's fine, not awesome.
Yeah.
But if I switch over to my other, this is the rebuilt computer that I had. Remember, I had a computer that was good. Where's? Oh, there it is. 930. So this is switching to the 930. Okay. It's better.
Nice. Very nice.
Frame rate is like 10.
Did you install the drivers?
Oh.
So I have the other Logitech here we have with the ball on the stick.
Yeah, the 910.
So yeah, so even though they're not, they're supposed to be driver free, I found it didn't work properly until I installed their driver pack.
Really?
And then it worked really well. Yeah, I know. It's just one of those things.
Well, that's suboptimal.
Yeah, so it might work, it might not. I don't know.
Huh. Okay, shoot. I had no idea that was a thing.
Because that 930 is a really nice camera.
Tis. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. It is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Today, we do not have John Galloway. He is out and about. And Hunter is over in Boston. And I am, in fact, going to go and teach a workshop later tonight. So I don't have too much time. But John Galloway very kindly did send a list of links to me. So I am going to attempt to share my screen.
Scott loves community today.
I love community.
Scott loves community.
This is the theme to Scott loves community. And let me share. Which of these many monitors do I share? Okay, tell me if you can see this.
I can see that.
Okay. And let's bring up, where are all of my emails? He gave me a whole list. Up here they are. All right, let's check them out. So here we've got Laurent Kempe, building and shipping ASP.NET Core on Azure with Docker Cloud. This is an add-on on some previous posts that were done on doing a HipChat Connect add-in with Core. People are doing all sorts of cool stuff. And what's nice about some of these posts is also use things like a free HTTP certificate that he got from Let's Encrypt, which is nice. So he walks through kind of a complete pipeline on how to go and do Docker and everything from the certificates, the setup, the whole deal. So I'm still learning Docker, so I have to go through this a little bit slowly. But check that out at Laurent Kempe. More from Strathweb, always fantastic content at Philip's site here. They're taking Web API Contrib, the community contribute project for Web API, and bringing it to ASP.NET Core. It's already got like Markdown tag helper. They got their style of Razor pages without controllers. Have you seen this?
Yes.
Yep. So they're starting.
We looked at that in one of the previous stand-ups, I think, briefly.
Maybe not the best name, but it's kind of similar ideas around Razor pages without controllers, and CSVs and stuff. Stuff that just needs to be there. The contrib thing is a nice sidecar that adds on to existing pieces of ASP.NET Core, and I'm sure they would appreciate help from folks. If if you're interested in getting involved in open source, you could probably talk to them and have a chat. Okay.
Cool.
This one is an interesting one. This is Steve Desmond on YouTube, looking a little bit shifty-eyed here. This is an ASP.NET Core upgrade speed run. So what he did is he was saying, I've got some code in RC2 and I want to upgrade it to RTM. He has no idea what was in store, but he decided to go and upgrade it live and have people watch. So you can go look on YouTube for Steve Desmond and see real programmers upgrading real code in real time and see whether or not it goes bad. So that was kind of cool. Now, we'll come back to this and share this here, but a .NET Core roadmap going out into 2017 was published. You'll talk about this in detail, and we'll go through that in just a moment. Okay. Moving along, Rahan Saeed, Fluent Interface, all the things. Some interesting Fluent Interface extensions to ASP.NET Code, building on top of Khaled Abu Hakme, who did a blog post on middleware building. And there's a lot of Fluent interfaces in Core right now. And this is a discussion about the pretty, whether he likes the prettier Fluent interface style, but how that works and what you can do to go and Fluent up your stuff. Put a little Fluent on it.
Nice.
Okay. We got some really great stuff coming on. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a resurgence of blogging. Now, Julie Lerman has gone at .NET Fringe and given a presentation called "Welcome to the New Age When Pigs Fly," doing one of her first talks on just a Mac, right? So she went and said, "All right, if we're going to do cross-platform, she's going to go all in." Traditionally, she's a Windows person for many, many, many years and an entity framework expert. She says, "I'm going to see if I can go and learn Postgres and Mac and do it all cross-platform." So she went through her experiences doing that work and put it all up on GitHub, and the video is available over on Next Day Video. This was part of .NET Fringe. So that was pretty fantastic. It was interesting to watch and see a person who's very, very experienced, but in an environment that they're not super familiar with, and it was pretty cool. She did amazing stuff, and at the end of it, went over into Docker. She had Postgres and everything running on multiple Docker containers.
Very cool.
The ASP.NET Monsters, ASP.NETmonsters.com, talking about Vue components. We could probably dig a little bit into Vue components in a future post and talk about like what they are and why they're useful. They're kind of one of those things that people maybe haven't necessarily totally noticed yet.
Yeah.
We should talk about that. So Vue components, check that out, ASP.NET Monsters. Over at Least Privilege, Dominic Bayer talks about identity and access control, and he's being extremely kind because, of course, remember that people who do open source are not necessarily paid for their open source. He's saying, well, .NET Core is out, where's Identity Server? And he's saying, well, we're working on it, right? It is a migration because they're moving from kind of the Katana former way of building into the ASP.NET Core way. And he's saying that they're going to have an RC by August. And then when the final ASP.NET tooling ships, Identity Server will be ready to go. So kudos to them for fighting the good fight and making Identity Server. Jonathan Channon, talking about building .NET Core projects in VS Code. He does all of his work in OS X and talks about some of the issues that you can bump into. And of course, he also uses ZSH and some of the features that you can do where you want to build everything using globbing. So he wants to go and do like a build all for a project instead of building just individual stuff, and how you can very easily modify your launch.sh's, your launch.json rather. Yep. It's not obvious that you can go and say, that you can go and say build and say * and do globbing. For a lot of people, globbing I don't think is necessarily an obvious thing.
It's funny because like it's anyone who's, well, I say anyone, well before I joined Microsoft and I had to hand edit MS build files for like TFS scenarios, we always use globbing for that stuff.
But because you were inside the file, like you just said it, right?
If you're just working in VS, you wouldn't necessarily know.
Yeah, you have to be in the text file, but there's a whole class of people who aren't in the text file.
Yeah.
This was an interesting one. Using roles with ASP.NET Core JWT middleware. So talking about these JSON web tokens, what those look like, what the payloads look like, and how those tokens flow through the system, how to use the jwt.io website. These are all the kinds of things that you're going to want to bump into when you start doing OpenID Connect and authorization. On his blog has been talking about those things, talking to Auth0, And actually, Cassandra Perch, who works for Auth0, and they did a video for .NET Fringe talking about all this stuff and OpenID and how it works very nicely on ASP.NET Core. So cool stuff there, both at Jerry Pelster stuff, and then Cassandra Perch will have their video up soon. Luca Gabi, using Medium to post, using React with TypeScript on Visual Studio. Kind of a nod to Steve Sanderson there. But went up and talked about how to do typing, how to get great IntelliSense and a good experience in Visual Studio while using components and things like that on the client side, and the relationship between TypeScript, Webpack, and typing and all those kinds of things. So check that out, Luca Gabi. Almost done, got 3 more. This is kind of an interesting one. It's unobtrusive client validation to Angular.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
So I did some stuff on this a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah? So this is
Spa.
So this is taking unobtrusive Angular validation built using Angular's existing framework, and then using an ng model and having it come all the way out to the client side.
Very nice.
Adding those validators. It's really quite clever if you're a fan of unobtrusive validation and you were using validation before. Why not bring it all the way forward?
Yeah, so I did that in the Music Store Spa.
Yeah.
A sort of prototype we did a couple of years ago, and then Steve's thing that he talked about last week has a feature for this as well. He didn't get a chance to demo that last week, but it also has something that does this. It's a pretty good way of doing it.
I definitely feel like prescriptions around validation would be helpful to everybody. What is the way, or at least a way, that we can all do it? Superloid, nice username, has Galador.reflection. So this is basically a new .NET serializer, and it's quite complete. It's got iOS, it's got Android, it's got PCLs, it's got test application. This is a collection of reflection-based .NET utilities, all done in 2015, and it will go off and make these DLLs. It only uses the PCL at compile time, so you'll get support for cross-platform, and you get a whole series of serializers, of additional serializers for serializing all kinds of stuff. Things for IOC, there's helper functions for fast typing and all kinds of stuff. So nice to see people collecting their utilities together for things like reflection and putting them out there for people. I think that if you're listening and you have some code that you haven't put yet on GitHub, now's the time to consider doing that. And then last but not least, again, at ASP.NET Monsters, they're announcing the Summer of Config contest. So they have some rules here for their contest. They want you to tweet out to them, fill out a form, and then you can join their contest. And I think we're looking for all sorts of swag. John Galloway is going to find some cool swag for Microsoft. You get a Telerik support and update subscription to their DevCraft stuff, T-shirts, stickers, and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to try to put together some swag to support their contest, the Summer of Config contest at ASP.NET Monsters. All right. And we're back. So let's go back to the roadmap. And you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Let me share it for you so you can see it as well, and then we can talk about what was discussed and what's good and what's less good.
Yeah, so like 1.0 we shipped on June 27th. So it's been exactly 3 weeks and 1 day. So it hasn't been that long. Sometimes it feels like
longer than that.
It feels like it's been an eternity because we've been trying to shut down for 1.0 for a long time, but it didn't actually get into customers' hands until 3 weeks ago. But that aside, it was time to share some details about what we're currently thinking about, what the roadmap ahead looks like. This is just the first communication along those lines. We're still working, obviously, to figure out more details, but I can quickly talk through what was shared. So Scott actually wrote this, our boss, Scott Hunter. And so the things that are talked about here is that for 101, basically, because this is a brand new platform, it's a brand new release, we expect there are going to be some issues that we weren't able to find during previews and during our own testing. So far, there are those 3 that we see there, and there's a couple of others that have happened since then that we're tracking to consider fixes for a patch release. And we're using these version numbers fairly loosely. Like the reality is the .NET Core product is made up of hundreds of different components, and some of them have different version numbers to others. But if we just think about sort of the collective, and we just shipped a 1.0, this will be a patch level update to the stack, but only certain components in the stack actually are going to receive changes as a result of this update.
Okay.
So we have a couple of issues here that we're talking about, like we said, some performance improvements in .NET Build that will help with publish times, which we've talked about quite a bit on the stand-up. We showed some workarounds for that in Azure source control deployment a couple of weeks ago.
Has much happened from that? Because there was maybe talk about making that kind of more official.
So we were going to do a blog post. We haven't done that yet. This investigation has been happening in the meantime. So we do have some fixes for .NET Build. We have some fixes for NuGet Restore, which are going to ship in the 3.5 release of NuGet in the near future. And both of those things will help, and .NET Publish as well. They will help the deployment times. And then the workaround that I showed, which involved telling Kudu to use the fast drive in Azure Web Apps to do basically all the building and publishing. Anyone can apply that now, but we haven't actually done a blog post on that. So you and I should actually sync up after this and get that blog post written and figure out what blog it should actually go on. Does it go on the ASP.NET blog? Does it go on the Azure blog? We'll figure that out. There was an issue with the .NET new templates for F# that we want to address. That's something to do with I think you know more about this than I do, actually. Maybe
for the which one? This one?
There was some issue with .NET new templates for F#.
Yeah, there was some confusion about whether it was going to be supported on that day out of the box, but and there were some miscommunications with some folks in the community that were helping us out with that work.
Okay.
But it works. It will work. It's going to work. It's important that it worked, but it wasn't actually, I don't think, intended to have worked out of the box. But I was showing it just yesterday, and .NET New on F# worked just fine.
Okay, so I believe there is a change slated for this sort of patch release that would fix or make that work, or whatever.
Right. It was a matter of publishing certain NuGet packages and making sure that they got upgraded appropriately when you did the .NET Restore.
And
People
then
are actively on that.
Okay, and then the bar for this is quite high, and when I say that, I mean we will assess issues with a very critical eye to determine whether they're serious enough to be included in a release of this nature. But we're also still working through right now, and we'll share more details of this when we have it, about sort of the ongoing cadence of releases for this new product for .NET Core. Okay. And so, do we start doing quarterly releases? Do we do monthly releases? Do we do semi-annual releases, et cetera, et cetera? Like, how does the LTS versus the FTS support and releasing work? And there's actually a new .NET Core support policy, which is linked to from the .NET Core acquisition website, which talks about LTS support versus FTS support. So we're working through the details of how that actually translates to releases, like where do I get new features, for example, and how does that affect the decisions about which version I use and how that relates to support. So we're working through all those details, and we'll have more information to share on that in the near future. So beyond that, this is where we get to more of the meaty stuff now about sort of the next versions that will include features. So for slated for end of this year, beginning of next year sometime, this would be the first minor update. And so this would include all the MS Build work that we previously talked about. So moving from Xproj Project ASIN to CSproj and MS Build. As we've said before, that transition should be automatic, whether you're using the .NET CLI or you're using Visual Studio or VS Code. We're going to try and make that experience as seamless as possible. The tooling at that point would be considered RTM. So the 1.0 tooling would be not preview anymore. It would be the RTM tooling. And so you shouldn't expect massive breaking changes in the sense of how the tooling works from that point forward. There's some, so I've talked about all that. So some .NET Restore improvements where right now, when you're using .NET Core app, the package and the TFM in your applications, like your ASP.NET Core applications that run on .NET Core, you kind of get a bit of a duplicity. There is a folder on your hard drive called Microsoft.NET Core.app, which contains a bunch of assemblies, but there's also a bunch of packages that kind of essentially the same thing as what's in that folder. And the SDK today doesn't really have a way to realize that they're the same thing and avoid having to download all the packages if you already have that shared framework on your drive. So we're looking to figure out whether we can make that experience a little smoother, so that if you just target the TFM NetCore app, that's all you have to say that you run on .NET Core, and you don't have to see a package if you don't want to deal with packages. Adding commands for managing the versions of those frameworks on your machine is something. I mean, you've brought this up a lot. I think you've talked about that many times. Can I just like .NET runtimes or .NET frameworks, and it shows me all the versions I have? Right now, we don't have that. That's something that we'd like to bring back to the command line experience. We had that in DNVM previously. And then .NET Publish, there's a feature here to make it so that .Publish will remove assemblies from the application output if you don't actually use them. So this is the concept of where you could oversubscribe to your dependencies,
right, and then trim them
and then trim them on the way out. And nice. That has some advantages. It means that we could potentially, for example, build a meta package or a series of meta packages that are much higher level, sort of like at its extreme, it would be like an ASP.NET Core meta package.
Right. So that you're saying that in my project.json, I could, just say, rather than 20 small things, right, just say I want ASP.NET Core full.
Right.
And then you'll trim it, and I won't get 200 megs.
Right.
When I publish, I'll get
when you publish. Right. And so we're trying to find that balance, because while we still very firmly believe in the tenets that we built .NET Core and ASP.NET Core on, where you only pay for what you pay for play, and you can build up the modules that you want. We also want to find that balance between, I don't want to have to reason about 47 different dependencies for a very basic sort of application. It'd be nice if I could just have one unit of reference for what is usually the stuff I'm going to use, ASP.NET, the default configuration providers, the standard middleware I might use, MVC, those type of things, and then have one version number I have to think about in terms of my dependencies, and just have the tool chain take care of actually deploying what's needed. So we're working through that right now. I believe we have the first builds of that working today, so that'll be in the next release in this timeline that's put out here. There's a whole section here about languages, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't know anything about that, but there's some great features coming in languages that I'm looking forward to.
I think what this is that the update to the .NET languages, like right now we're on C# 6.
Yeah.
So then when we update to C# 7,
yes,
that will be an option where you'll be able to somehow get that new feature. And I don't know whether it's an opt-in thing, or how
I think
you indicate
it wouldn't be
one versus the other.
It'll be in the next version of the SDK. So basically, the way you get the new language, right, is you get the new compiler. And in the case of the .NET Core CLI, the compiler is shipped in the .NET Core CLI itself. .NET-compile-CSC, which itself calls csc.exe. So we actually ship it in the box. And so what will happen is, when you update to the whatever this version ends up being for the .NET Core CLI or the subsequent Visual Studio tools,
sure,
you will get C# 7.
So I guess the question would be, would you ever not want it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, there is always a way to turn it. That's a compiler option. Just like it is today in Visual Studio, in your web.config file for runtime compilation, or in your CS proj, you can set the language version.
So is that a project.json thing, or
yes.
Is that?
Yeah, you can do that right now. So you can go into the build options in project.json and change the language version.
Oh, okay, cool, good. So the point here is that these next releases come to all platforms, and that's the thing. So C# 7, particularly like pattern matching is sweet, and all that stuff's going to come. So it's just going to get better. And then F# 4.1 as well is going to have full .NET Core support.
Yeah, is in the .NET Core CLI in that project system.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's a bit more to say we have full F# support and things like ASP.NET Core.
No. So the way I would phrase it is not that .NET Core has full F# support, but F# 4.1 is updating with support for .NET Core.
Yes, and then and you'll be able to use the .NETCore CLI and the .NET Core project system and use F#.
Right, and I believe that there's actually a whole. This is a very short paragraph here, just as this is. Yeah. There's a whole roadmap over in there. Exactly. There's stuff that explains what's coming in 4.1 of F#.
Yeah. So then down to ASP.NET Core, this is just a very high-level summary of some of the things that we're doing. So the WebSockets support will land in this release. We're working on a URL rewriting middleware. So if today you use mod rewrite in Apache, or you use URL rewrite in IIS, this is a middleware that basically performs the same function. We have, for example, it can actually read mod rewrite and or URL rewrite config files, and then perform the rewriting in the middleware rather than in the server. Now, why is that interesting? Because there are going to be scenarios where you're not going to be running behind Apache or behind IIS in the future. And so this means that you can put more stuff in code, basically, put more stuff in your app. There's some stuff we want to do to improve ASP.NET Core running on Azure. And so there's some stuff to do with startup times. We want to get that starting as fast as possible, deploy and start. Building a logging provider specifically to work well in Azure. So today, when you deploy to Azure App Service, the portal gives you a bunch of checkboxes that let you change how application logging works in your application. Like, do you want the logs to go to blob storage? Do you want them to go to file storage? Do you want them to go to the table storage? They have a feature called log streaming, so that while the app is running, you can use the Azure CLI or go into the portal and see the logs live for your application. Those features require integration that we haven't done in ASP.NET Core yet. They only work on the system web ASP.NET stuff today. So we're going to do that work as part of this next release cycle. We're also looking at what it would mean to build a nice story around Azure Key Vault, which is a crypto or key management provider in Azure, and then also support for Azure AD's B2C identity system, so that you can delegate authentication of your application to Azure AD with support for Facebook and Twitter and social login and all that type of stuff, so that you don't actually need that stuff in your app itself. So we're looking at all those things. Containers and microservices will be a big increasing push around scenarios focused at running .NET Core and containers and microservices. When that actually comes down to concrete features, we're still working all that through that type of stuff. But the point is, we really care about what does it mean for .NET Core and ASP.NET Core developers to use those things in a container-like fashion. And that means everything you can think. Am I developing? Am I running tests in a container? Am I debugging a container? Am I deploying into a container? Do I have lots of containers and doing service discovery between them? We're looking at the full gamut of sort of developer experience and publishing experience around that, and trying to see if there's value that we can add. So off the bat, Service Fabric, we're shipping the Web Listener server. Web Listener is the ASP.NET Core server that is based on HTTP sys, and it is an alternative to Kestrel. Okay, so you choose either Kestrel or Web Listener. Web Listener, being based on HTTP sys, does have a couple of unique features. One, it supports Windows authentication. Two, it supports port sharing, because HTTP sys supports port sharing. So you can have multiple processes listening on the same port that are then effectively multiplexed based on host and or path, and that's done for you in the kernel. And then the other thing that Web Listener has that Kestrel doesn't have right now is Web Listener will be sort of approved as an edge server. So it is based on HTTP sys, which has a long history of security hardening and all the rest of it. So we're happy to say that yes, you can run Web Listener directly on the internet. Whereas Kestrel, we haven't given that blessing yet, and we're still going through the process of making sure that we implement all the appropriate security measures and things in Kestrel, so that we can say, yep, you're fine to stick that on an edge server. Today,
is that a good idea?
What?
I'm just talking, but could we just not do that?
When you just talk, you get yourself in trouble.
Well, I suppose. But could we not do that? You're saying is nodes edge server and edge server?
What's that saying?
When you say node.exe isn't an edge server, right?
It is if you want it to be. What I mean by edge server is that we are happy recommending it as a server that you can place on the public internet. So if you have extremely high performance scenarios, or in a microservices environment where you have lots and lots of different instances of your app and you want to directly expose them without other infrastructure that's doing reversing, just because it makes sense for your scenario. Today, we don't recommend that for Kestrel. We just come out and say it. We don't recommend that yet. That's why we tell you to put Nginx in front of it on Linux, or IIS in front of it on Windows. And that self-host scenario without something sitting in front of it, we're still working through sort of certifying the strong word, but you know what I mean. Officially blessing Kestrel for that scenario. Whereas Web Listener, because it's based on HTTP sys, that work has already been done. So that will be shipped in order to support that very scenario with Service Fabric. And then we're looking at some improvements specifically in MVC and the DI system to aid in startup time, because startup time is very important when building apps that fire up in containers. You want containers to be able to be deployed and fire up as quickly as possible. You don't want to wait 5 seconds for your container to start. So then we've got some previews that we're working on. Now, whether these things ship as a preview or we actually get them done enough to ship them as an RTM in this time frame, we'll figure out as we go along. But Signaler and View Pages is what the tentative name we're using for this for the feature in MVC. So Signaler is a pretty well-known quantity. We started planning on that this week. I actually logged an issue for that in the Signaler repo called 1.0.0.planning. So it's pretty nascent right now. We're just starting out, but you can get an idea of some of the ideas we have other than just getting it to work. And then for the MVC View Pages, there's a much longer description of the type of things that we're looking to do over in the MVC repo issue 494. So I explicitly state some goals of what we're trying to achieve, some non-goals, which is important to call out. And then I go into how it would actually potentially work. And we're actually in the middle of building that prototype right now. So if people are interested in it, we've already had a couple of people engage on those GitHub issues, both the Signaler one and the View Pages one. Mm-hmm. So if you are interested in that, by all means, go and do so. What else we got? So ARM support is mentioned there for .NET Core. So we did, for DNX, we had ARM builds at one point. In fact, I think in one of the stand-ups I showed it running on a Raspberry Pi, right?
Right. There's a lot of people have been asking, can they recreate that? Because they kind of believe that, like, well, that was just a thing that was for that show.
Yeah. So that cannot be recreated right now. That's something.
Without a lot of work, we had to Pavel had to custom build the whole CLR that way.
Right. So I don't think it is a reasonable thing that we could expect anyone other than people who work here to be able to do right now. So that's something, getting that enabled, at least getting it back to the point where it was with DNX again, where there is a runtime, an ARM build of the runtime, and the packages basically work.
It shouldn't be impossible.
It shouldn't be impossible. This is about unblocking scenarios rather than fully supporting them, right? Which is a very important distinction to make.
Oh, that's interesting. Dig into that for me.
So we need to be careful with our language sometimes, because different people interpret the word support to mean different things. So some people think support just means it works. Oh, look, they fixed a bug and now it works, they support it. Other people interpret support to mean I can call Microsoft customer support services, give them my credit card or give them my enterprise agreement number, and now that they will drop everything and come and support me because I'm using this thing this way. So I like to term this is about unblocking people. We want to make it possible to get an ARM distribution of .NET Core runtime and the libraries and ASP.NET Core so that you can run it on a Raspberry Pi. Now, that doesn't mean that it's particularly fully supported by us yet, but to get to that phase, we have to first make it even possible for you to get a build, in some preview stage.
That's a really important and really good distinction. I like that. Yeah. When someone says, "Can I do that?" Yes, you can do that. Will you support me when I do that? I will not support you in any way when you do that. Good luck.
Yeah. So this is about unblocking. That's the first phase, and then eventually, and that's the first step towards a long process to officially supporting it.
Cool.
And then the supporting more Linux distributions is something that the team would like to do as well. And there's a comment there that we might enable that by making it easier for people to build their own distros from the source of .NET Core itself.
Yeah, it probably would be nice to get support for. Was it Alpine Linux? Which is the one for Docker?
So Alpine is a whole different kettle of fish. So we are working on Alpine distinctly because Alpine is so small. It's like 5 megabytes or something.
And the whole point is to have it to be small.
Yes, understood. But when that one, that's fine. So it's just I think
it's hard.
Alpine is in a whole different class. It's not like just it's another distro. It's not.
It's a very specific tiny distro.
Yeah, it's incredibly different, and we are doing the work. We have started that work to support Alpine, but it's still an unknown quantity as to when.
Not a slam dunk by any means.
Not at all. But whereas other Linux distros would be much more straightforward. There are, we have Ubuntu already. We have, I think we support Mint. We do CentOS. We do Debian, and we do Red Hat. And what's the other one? What's the one that Fedora?
Yeah.
And et cetera, et cetera. There are many, many other distros that are very similar to those that we'd like to make it fairly straightforward for you to be able to get that to work.
Do we need any kind of feedback from the community? Do we need a business case made, or do you need if we tell the people who are watching the show right now, did they lose someone with we need this support? Do we know if people want it, or we just know that it should be done?
Well, I think it's if we look at our competitors and we look at other stacks that are cross-platform, it seems to be that generally there's a pretty obvious way to go about getting a different distribution set up, right? that doesn't involve the people who produce or own the project to do it themselves. And so there's a difference between us producing a distribution and blessing it and supporting it, to use that word again, and putting it out there, versus saying, oh, you want to run Foo or .NET Core on this Linux distro? Here's the instructions. Clone the Git repo, run this script, blah, 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 and it builds it and installs it for you. As opposed to we support dozens and dozens and dozens of different Linux distros using their package managers with official support from Microsoft and that type of thing. So I think there's a spectrum there that we want to enable, all the way from it's fully supported by Microsoft. You can get an official distribution that we built and we signed, right, and that we support from the package manager for that OS, all the way down to, oh wow, I just invented my own Linux distribution. How would I go about getting .NET Core to work on it?
Right.
Okay, EF. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff for EF. I haven't actually read this bit.
Ton of stuff.
Rowan would have done this. Complex types I see, and complex custom type conversions I've seen come up from customers, so it's good to see that.
We need to wrap it up a little bit. I have to go to this.
Yep.
Go and give a presentation.
Well, we're almost done. So then, excellent. And then beyond that is the work.
What's this about here?
Guys. Yeah. So that's the pivot to what we're calling .NET Standard 2. And it actually mentions that 3 lines down, to bring back more of the .NET APIs from the original BCL.
Okay. So that means it'll be easier for me to port things.
Yeah, that's the promise, especially between things like Xamarin, which are based on Mono, which were based on full framework. And so basically re-platforming that by bringing a lot more of those APIs back to .NET Standard and .NET Core. And then the last thing is just a promise to do more blog posts, basically, so that we can get more information out about what we're doing, when things are coming, and those type of things.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're good.
No questions today. No time.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We do want to do questions, but again, we also have to ship the thing, and I have to drive downtown, which is an hour away.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks as always for your patience. We're trying to do the right thing here, and we're making it getting a little better every day. Dramatic zoom out.
Dramatic zoom out engaged.
Bum 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 bum. See, now I have to go and pay Intel for the. Why is it so crooked? Why is the video so crooked?
People keep bumping the camera.
Clearly. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.